Good afternoon. My name is Tim Markle. I'm the director of the Southern Regional Center for Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs. This is Conversations on Showing Up for Kids, an informal, casual place where we try to talk about what's going on in the world around us and children and youth with special healthcare needs. I just want to remind people that this is being recorded. And so please no personal identifiable information or personal health information, because once something is on the web, it is out there forever. That being said, I am so totally excited for today's conversation. We'll be talking with Sharon Madsen, and she is going to sort of give some highlights for a guide that the Department of Public Instruction put out called A Guide to Implementing IEPs and Monitoring Progress of IEP Goals when moving between in-person, hybrid, or virtual learning environments. And I cannot think of a time when school and school attendance has been so fluid between in-person, hybrid, and virtual. So I just think this guide is very timely and excited that you could join us, Sharon.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Tim. So as Tim said, I'm Sharon Madsen. I'm with the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. I work as an educational consultant there. My focus is mainly on specific learning disabilities, and I'm just very excited to be part of this conversation.
So tell us a little bit about how did the guide come out? How did you guys decide that there was something going on that
Yeah,
needed to happen?
well, with the whole pandemic and everything, we knew that this school year was going to look very different for all of us. And this was really the brainchild of Daniel Parker, who's the assistant director of special education. He, did a lot of the bulk of the guide, and I focused mainly on the progress monitoring section. But really, we knew that districts may be starting in person. Some districts may be going all virtual. And then there's districts that are also in hybrid modes this year. So the expectation this year too is to make sure that IEPs can be implemented as written so that students do have access to that free and appropriate public education. Understandably, this is something that is really different for many districts, as we're not used to having students shift in and out of virtual learning or doing a combination of the two. And there are some pretty big discussions that IEP teams need to have at times, because there are certain services that we're so used to doing in person. How do we, start to think outside of the box and ensure that the students' needs can be met if they're in a virtual environment? So that was really, how we came up with this idea. So we worked on it all summer long, and then we had it ready to roll out in the fall, and it has evolved and changed a few times since publishing it, as the nature of the pandemic has changed as well. But we do have it published now. It's on DPI's website, and there's also some training videos that go along with it.
Awesome. I didn't even know. I totally forgot about the training videos. Show you how well prepared I am for today. So that is
Okay.
fantastic that you also have training videos available.
Yep, and I'll put those in the chat too, if that would be helpful.
That would be very helpful. That would be great. Because I can only imagine I can imagine from a parent's point of view that last spring we had a lot of parents that were taking this point of view of, this is extraordinary times. This is different. This is weird. We're going to give a little bit of grace. We're going to give a little bit of mercy. Maybe we'll just write off these last 3 months and hope for the best. And then fall happened. And all of a sudden it's just like, okay, everything that we had planned on doing this fall as my son or daughter transitioned to the next grade with their IEP, how the heck is that going to get accomplished? And so I appreciate the fact that you guys were thinking about that over the summer and getting ready for this possibility where we seem to be at now. So what sort of things did you learn, or what are some of the top offers to the IEP teams? What do they need to think about?
Quite a bit. So, there's the general considerations that all districts are thinking about with regards to COVID-19. Just how are we educating our students that have IEPs during this time, especially if they're in a virtual environment 100% or 50% of the time. considerations for wearing that personal protective equipment if you are doing some in-person instruction, in it, especially with students who may not be able to wear that PPE, how can staff safeguard themselves? Other things, considering how to leverage the strengths of the families who may be having to support their children at home, and then always trying to reduce the barriers to students' education. So, and again, that's something that we're all thinking about right now. But the guide is divided up into two sections. The first section kind of goes into great detail about determining if the IEP can be implemented as written. And there's 4 steps to that. The first thing we'd encourage IEP teams to do is review the effects of the disability and the disability related needs. I'm sure as parents and educators, you've seen that you may have discovered some additional disability related needs if you've had to service a student in a virtual environment. And then there may be disability related needs that you don't have to address in a virtual environment. A lot of those in-person interactions can be difficult to address in a home setting. So you have to kind of think about what are some authentic opportunities that you could still have those needs met. And then I know just with my own children, frustration and working on some coping skills in a virtual learning environment seems to be a new need that has come up for many families.
Well, it seems this is an opportunity too for IEP teams to really put the I into the IEP plan. Is that I know sometimes, we can get used to everything that, that schools have to offer is okay, can be pulled out for this, can go to this room for this. Okay. They'll do speech therapy together as a group over here. So we need to plan that. And, IEP teams differ. Some are really good at looking at that child and what is that child's strength and how are we going to help them meet the goals of the IEP. And that's something that, like you said, has to be reconsidered now that we don't have that supportive school environment around the child. And so really looking at what is the effect of that disability, of that child's disability on their learning, I think is a great question to ask when you're moving between environments.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's kind of a very similar flow that happens when you're looking at all these different pieces of the guide and the different process questions. And usually, if the answer to the question is yes, students' affective disability and disability related needs have remained the same, you would just continue to go about and implement the IEP. You don't need to do any additional paperwork or hold a meeting or revise the IEP using that I-10 form. And then if the answer to the question is no, some more discussion is needed around whatever section of the IEP you're reviewing. And again, the guide goes through everything step by step in coaching IEP teams and how to address those different needs and all the different sections of the IEP.
Because the whole goal is to make progress. This isn't just we'd really like to see these things, but we want to be able to see the child grow in their education, which then gets back to how do you monitor progress of these IEP goals. So what are some of the ideas around how to monitor progress when you have this fluid learning environment?
Sure. So even before you get to that step, you want to make sure that the goal is still appropriate if the student is in a virtual environment, or if they're in a hybrid where you can address it sometimes in person and sometimes in a virtual environment. One of the things we've looked at is sometimes you have to make the goal a little bit more broad rather than just being specific to a school setting. An example that we use is maybe a student has a disability related need where they're working on following routines. So when we're in person, naturally we would write that to be in a school setting. So the example we use is that the student is in a cafeteria, they know how to gather their food, get the appropriate utensils. When they're finished, they do the proper cleanup procedure. But if you're shifting to virtual, or if the student is, virtual only part of the time, how can we leverage that goal and leverage the knowledge and capacity of the family to continue to address a goal? How could we revise it? So again, you go back to that disability related needs of needing to improve following routines and
Mhm.
asking the parents, well, what are some routines at home? And maybe then the goal is just revised to be a little bit more general so that it can be applied in both school and home setting.
Oh, and that brings up an interesting tickle at the back of my head about communication with parents, between parents, families, and schools. And the fact that it would be an interesting discussion, even if everything goes back to being, very school based. What about writing those IEP goals a little broader
Mm-hmm.
to include, so that the child is working on the same things at home as they are in school and reinforcing that learning together? Is that
Absolutely.
maybe this will be a way to sort of work at that bridge a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. And then you had asked about what does progress monitoring look
Yeah.
like if you're in a virtual environment? And again, some goals translate very well into a virtual environment. I think about a goal for maybe oral reading fluency. Well, that's something, Tim, you and I could do that right now. I could have a passage, PDF of a passage put up, or a list of sight words. I could be marking down on my recording sheet what you're reading, what you're missing. And I could just continue to monitor progress the same way I would in a school setting or an in-person setting. There are other goals that might be a little bit trickier to monitor the progress on. And we have had the question quite a bit, can the family help with, documenting some of that progress and keeping some of that data? The short answer to that question is yes, but then there are some considerations that you need to take into
Yeah.
account before you tell the parents, hey, I need your help monitoring these goals. Here's some recording sheets. First and foremost, you need to make sure that the family's able to and willing to help in that situation. Providing some coaching opportunities and conversations before you have them start collecting that data is also really critical. And then the teacher case manager needs to set up some kind of schedule and agreement on when and how that data is going to be collected and returned back to the case manager. So again, it could be as simple as, having a Google survey sent home to the
Mhm.
parent each week. It might look like the parent taking a, taking a snapshot of student work. So just a lot of different ways and creativity that we've heard on the part of IEP teams. We also stress to IEP teams to check in with parents early on because sometimes our plans don't go the way that we thought. Parents may have other commitments, they may be working from home, they may have other children in the home that need their attention as well. And oops, forgot to collect data. And it would be
Yeah.
really unfortunate if you got to progress report time and didn't have any data. So again, just those frequent check-ins, making sure that the family's comfortable providing those coaching opportunities, and then having a backup plan too. So what if you set this up with the parents and now they're not able to collect the data? What's your plan B to show
Yeah,
that the student's making progress?
I was going to ask, because it sounds like you're not saying, the IEP team can sit there and say, okay, because the learning is happening virtually, then the progress has to be recorded by the parent in the home. So you're not saying, oh, this is now the parent's responsibility. You're not putting more on parent, but you're saying, okay, let's partner so that we can track this child's progress, because we want to make sure that what we're doing is effective. Is we don't want to keep using ineffective methods. If change isn't happening, if we're not getting closer to the goal, then we have to look at doing something different. And that's where parents could come in to say, I'm not seeing any change. This isn't working. My kid isn't learning. Now, what can a parent do if at the beginning they sit there and say, yes, this is fantastic, I love it, and then all of a sudden, like you said, the parent has to work from home too? How do they say, I can't do this anymore? What do
Yeah,
they do if their circumstance changes?
yeah, I think just reaching out to their point person, case manager, service provider, or special ed teacher, And, I don't know of a case manager that would push back and say, no, you have to do this. This is what we agreed to. As educators, we're used to being flexible. And again, this is where that, having that backup plan would come in handy. So, while it may be ideal to have the parent be the data collection person, always just be thinking, what's going to happen? What if the parent gets sick, or what if they, all of a sudden need to devote most of their attention to their job?
Yeah, it seems this has been an opportunity to increase some family engagement and family communication, which as a parent, I think is always a good thing. So I like the fact that, the IEP can be a learning tool, which it is, enhance that learning. How do we help this child grow? But it can also be a good communication tool between this is what I'm seeing at home that can be reflected in the IEP, and then this is what he's growing, and I can see this change at home. Since you started to do this reading intervention, my kid now loves books at home. To be able to set up that back and forth feedback with the school, I think it's really cool. Do you know, has that been increasing during this virtual time, or have any
Yeah.
idea?
Yeah, I think in general it seems to have been, at least that's kind of the vibe that I get when I'm handling calls from parents and districts. Um, and I think it's also really important for IEP teams to communicate what the services will look like in person versus virtual, because that seems to be a little area of confusion. If you're meeting with a group of students to do some reading instruction at school, that might take you up to 25, 30 minutes. But if you only have the capacity on Zoom or whatever web-based platform you're using, and you're doing it one-on-one with a student, you may only need about 15 minutes to complete that same lesson and still address that annual IEP goal and make sure that you're meeting the student's needs. One way to kind of be proactive about that is to include a contingency plan in an IEP. So you're saying, virtually, these are the services that your child may be getting. And again, communicating to parents, you're seeing less minutes here because it's only your child and me, and we're more
Mhm.
efficient with our time there, but we're still attacking the same skills. So they're still going to make progress versus, on days when the student is in person, or if we shift back to in-person learning at some point in the school year, this is the services that they'll be getting, and this is what it will look like.
So understanding the fluid environment and writing in, like you said, those contingency plans,
Yes, and that,
and
yeah.
almost having to write in when the child, because a lot of places are going ABs and AB schedules and
Mhm.
stuff. So on A days, this is the way this learning is going to take place. The supports are going to take place. On B days, then they'll meet with blah, blah, blah in person because they're in school. So making sure that that's written in and is clear in the IEP.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think IEP teams who have been very proactive in reviewing IEPs, over the summer in preparation for this new school year, they found that they were able to save themselves a lot of time and paperwork in the long run because they had that contingency plan in place. So, if school has a sudden shutdown or student is quarantined, well, they have their plan B of what they're going to do when
Mhm.
the student is virtual.
Yeah, it's nice that they've had that summer, like you said, and they used that summer to plan for it, because I know in spring everybody was just like scrambling, doing the best
Yes.
that they could.
Yeah. And
So
that's,
hopefully things happen a lot
yeah.
more planfully this fall.
Hmm.
So what else is contained in this guide that might be interesting to educators, case managers, or parents?
I think we have a really comprehensive section of resources in the back of the guide. We've drawn from some national resources on intervention and virtual progress monitoring, as well as taking existing guidance and documents from DPI, on just how to progress monitor, what are the good characteristics of progress monitoring, or what should be included in an IEP.
And I think that's important to understand, because sometimes, and I love the fact that it's in the guide, because I know in my job, I get used to phrases and I know what certain phrases mean. And so you talk, in your case, maybe progress monitoring, and what you're looking for, what that step entails, and what the outcome's supposed to be. As a parent coming in, being able to see what is it that you mean by progress monitoring, seeing what is that, and that I see the definition of progress monitoring is in there, so that I can understand what language it is you're speaking.
Yes,
I think
yeah.
it's really important.
Absolutely. And you just brought up another important point. We do have a lot of federal language in there as well, just about what are the basic requirements in implementing an IEP and progress monitoring, because those requirements, even though we're still operating in a pandemic and the school year has looked very different, we're still expecting those same requirements to be upheld.
Yeah, that the IDEA did not go away. It has not been put on hold. We are not
Nope.
pretending nobody has a disability. It's still the same laws in place and the same supports have to be given.
Right. And this is where that progress monitoring is so important again, Tim, because if you've noticed that your child's not making progress, that should raise a red flag. Hey, we need to have an IEP meeting. We may need to make some revisions, or we need to brainstorm how can this child better access the instruction that we're able to provide.
Well, and that's that whole access the instruction is also really interesting. And it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds as things continue to change, because I think we've seen some children have really responded very well to the lack of chaos in a schoolroom, and they're able to focus better and they're able to communicate better. Whereas other kids, this has just not been the best school year for them at all, is that they really need to be there to engage in learning. And so trying to figure out those different ways of instruction, I think it's been something that, maybe is a benefit as we're thinking about ways of instruction differently than we have in the past. And I think that's a positive thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm just amazed at what IEP teams have done and the creative thinking that's gone on throughout the whole pandemic. And, just seeing with my own child, and, I think initially we were worried about that student teacher relationship might not be as strong because it's not authentic in a virtual environment. Well, that worry was blown out of the water. I think teachers have found meaningful ways to connect with students despite not being in person. And yeah, there's just been some really wonderful things going on in the field.
Yep. And I've heard some wonderful things about being able to, a lot of parents with the child with disabilities very worried about that relationship with the paraprofessional and the aide, and being able to figure out how to continue that relationship in a virtual environment. And, is it 2 screens? Is it, is the para here? Who do they ask? And, I've gotten really creative in
Yes.
ways to engage those students. And, a lot of that goes back to, why does that happen? Because it's written in the IEP. Because the IEP team has looked at the disability, has looked at where the child is, where they want the child to get to in their learning, and how are we going to get them there? And that how are we going to get them there is that IEP. And so when the IEP team looks at that, then they're able to think creatively about how to help that student achieve. And we've seen examples of that. It's been really
Yes.
cool. Well, I do want to, come back and let you say anything else you want in a moment. But I do want to take a short time here and see if anybody who is on the call has any questions for you. You can either put them in the chat, you can unmute yourself. I'll be watching your fun little red microphones in the corner. If I don't see any little red microphones unmute, then I will just keep talking. We'll keep having this conversation for a little while more. Or like I said, I will gladly read in the chat thing. Rebecca.
Yeah, I do have a question about the contingency plans. Are there districts that do a completely separate form and attach it to the IEP, or are most districts kind of embedding it within the program summary?
That's a good question. I honestly don't know what districts are doing. I think some may just be including that in the program summary. Yes, you may. Sorry, I got a little one interrupting me. Hold on one second.
No problem.
If
you need to take a little break, as we can have a discussion amongst ourselves, Sharon, it's okay. We understand.
Yeah, it's possible there could be districts that have developed their own forms for that, but I think we've seen it mostly recorded in the program summary.
Thank you. We're just kind of already looking forward to next fall as we're having annual IEPs, and how
Yes.
safe is it to assume that things will probably be back to quote unquote normal? But if we do have to pivot, could we, we're just thinking ahead. So,
And
Well,
I think that's really smart to be already thinking about next year, because if we've learned anything during COVID, it's we don't know what's going to happen.
yeah, planning. I mean, before we were planning for things, trying to plan for things that you didn't think could happen or had no idea could happen. It's very hard. And now at least we've encountered something that we didn't take into account. So it's helping us plan and helping us see what could happen. And so I totally agree. I have no confidence of what normality is going to look like in the fall. I'm hopeful, but I love the fact that you got to keep it in the back of your head. Deb, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I was interested if maybe we could learn more about this whole concept of additional services that DPI has defined. Any thoughts on how that could look? And, particularly, I don't know if this happened in all school districts, but, when services were cut and, for example, speech therapy, when everybody in the district had their speech therapy cut in half because of the pandemic. So it wasn't really an individual decision. It was everybody was having a reduction. So, I don't know if you could talk about that. And for those kids that really, this was critical, but everybody equitably had a reduction in services. And then how does that concept of additional services just look? Because I want to say in a document I read that TPI had done, districts have like 5 months, I think, to be evaluating kids. So if you wouldn't mind sharing some of your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. You are correct. So that was something that we put out last spring to address kind of what Tim was talking about, where we weren't quite sure how to navigate this whole situation. And, the theme was kind of, let's do the best that we can to the best of our ability. And, like you had said, there were students who were missing services, and we did put that bulletin out there saying that the students who had missed services need to be, they need to receive those additional services. And our IEP teams had, I think, a 6-month window to meet in the beginning of the school year, decide if additional services were needed, and like you said, possibly reevaluate if needed. Since this start of the school year, we're operating under the we're being told that we need to provide students with a free and appropriate public education. So if there are services that are not being provided, that should trigger an IEP team discussion. And instead of additional services, you're going to be looking more at compensatory services.
Yeah, I think, again, I think that's really important because it comes down to what's in the IEP. And again, people were given pretty wide latitude in the spring and everything didn't happen the way that we wanted it to. But if things still are not, if the services that are in the IEP to help the child progress in learning are not happening, then the IEP team needs to figure out what's going on, because that's not okay. That's layman's terms.
Thank you, Tim, for summarizing that. Yeah, so, we always encourage parents, the first place you want to start is with the district and the IEP team. And then, if you're feeling like you're not being heard or just not coming to a common agreement, you can utilize those dispute resolution options. And we do have those available on our DPI website. And that can look anything from like a facilitated IEP to a due process arrangement.
Yeah, but again, that first step is always, and I just going back to your progress monitoring, I think that it just reminds me of what Deb was saying is that, that even if the, staff changes or whatever, and for a few months, there has to be a change in the way services are delivered. That doesn't mean you can stop monitoring the progress of those services. Is just because the method changed doesn't mean you're just like, oh, well, we changed the method. I guess we don't have to keep track of how it's working. No, everything has to be tracked about how is it working. And so if there's a change in services and they're tracking and they find out with their testing that, you know what, this 20-minute individual speech therapy is progressing the child as well as that 60-minute group therapy or better, okay, then let's stick with this. But if they look at it and all of a sudden, without that group, that child is no longer progressing, then the IEP team has to step in and figure out, okay, we're not making progress. We need to change the IEP. We need to figure out, we need to try something else to hit our progress goals. Again, that's my layman's terms looking from the outside in. So please feel free to correct me, Sharon, if I'm misspeaking.
No, I think, again, you summarized that really beautifully.
Thanks. Being a parent is, it's helpful.
Yes.
As you know, it gives you that added level of insight. Other questions? I'm not seeing any little red microphones go off. Don't see anything in the chat. So Sharon, any final words you want to tell us about the guide?
Nothing that comes to the top of my mind. I did put that link to the training videos and guide in the chat if there's anyone interested in viewing the videos or looking at the guide more in depth. That is located on our CCR IEP page as well, which is also worth taking a look at if you haven't before. And then if you continue to have questions after this, I can put my email in the chat as well, and feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to answer questions via email. And if I can't answer them, I can usually track down a person who can.
There should be somebody in the Jeff buildings or on your email somewhere that knows the answer to it. That would be really cool and very helpful. And I want to encourage parents to, parents are part of the IEP team as well. So look over this guide and you get to assist the IEP team in doing its job. You're an important partner in those education plans. And so this is not something that's just for the educators, is that parents can be informed about this as well. And so I appreciate that part as well. Thank you so much for being here, Sharon. Thank you everybody for joining us. We will have this video posted hopefully by the end of the week on the Conversations for Showing Up for Kids website, link from the website. We do have a conversation with somebody from the mediation system. And so if you want to learn a little bit more about the Wisconsin Special Education Mediation System, feel free to watch that Conversations for Showing Up for Kids. Next week, we're going to be flipping to the medical and talking about EPSDT, early and periodic diagnostic screening and testing, which if you have anybody who has Medicaid, you want to learn about EPSDT. So hopefully you can come back next week. Thank you all very much. Have a great rest of the day. And for anybody who wants to hang on. I'm just going to stop the video and then we can talk offline if you'd like. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim.